wanted you. I wanted you. I wanted you more than one yourself. But you proved that it was only one way. That feeling was only one way. That love, that loyalty, it was all one way. You take care of my kids, okay? You couldn't take care of me.
It began like any other quiet morning in Savannah, Georgia. Humid air, the faint hum of cicadas, the world just beginning to wake. But at 9:39 a.m. on October 5th, 2022, a voice over the police dispatch pierced that calm, a mother reporting her 20-month-old son missing. "The door was open," she said. "He couldn't have opened it himself." In that moment, an ordinary neighborhood turned into the center of a nightmare. The missing boy's name was Quinton Simon, a cheerful toddler known to his family as Monkey. His laughter used to fill the small house on Buckhalter Road, where toys lay scattered across the porch and cartoons flickered on the TV each morning. But that day, the sounds of innocence were replaced by sirens and footsteps. Officers arrived within minutes, spreading through the surrounding fields, calling out his name. Neighbors gathered, whispering prayers and disbelief. Who could take a child from his own home? And if he hadn't been taken, where could he have gone? As the hours passed and no trace was found, fear began to bloom, first quietly, then loudly, until it consumed everyone involved. The search would soon become one of the largest in the city's history, drawing national attention. But beneath the public chaos, behind the flashing lights and cameras, there was something darker, something that could not yet be spoken aloud. Because sometimes, the most haunting stories don't begin in the shadows. They start inside the walls we call home. Before his name filled headlines and courtroom transcripts, Quinton Simon was simply a little boy who loved cartoons and cheese snacks. Born on January 8, 2021, in Savannah, Georgia, he was the kind of child who lit up every room he entered. His family called him Monkey because he loved to climb, dance, and mimic every move his older brother made. He was small but full of energy, always laughing, always curious, with that rare habit of saying thank you, even when no one expected it. He adored Paw Patrol and Blippi, and his favorite game was hide and seek under the living room table. To the neighbors, Quinton was a symbol of joy, a boy with big green blue eyes and a voice that giggled more than it spoke. But as often happens in real life, light existed beside shadow. Behind that innocent smile, the family was struggling. His mother, Leilani, was just 22, young, restless, and fighting personal battles that often clouded her judgment. Her mother, Billy Jo, had stepped in to care for Quinton and his brother, trying to create stability where chaos had begun to grow. By law, Billy Jo was the children's guardian, though Leilani still lived in the same home. It was an arrangement built on love and exhaustion, one that seemed to hold together only because of Billy Jo's determination. Still, the cracks were visible: financial strain, arguments that neighbors could hear through the thin walls, promises made and broken. Yet through it all, Quinton remained the heart of that house, the one constant everyone adored, but not everyone could protect. He was too young to understand how fragile the world around him was. And in the days to come, that fragile balance would shatter in a way no one could ever repair. By late summer of 2022, tension inside the Simon household had reached its breaking point. What had once been a temporary living arrangement turned into a storm of resentment and fatigue. Under one roof lived 3 young children, their 22-year-old mother, Leilani, her boyfriend Daniel, and her mother, Billy Jo, the legal guardian of the 2 oldest boys. The house on Buckhalter Road was crowded not only with people, but with arguments, unpaid bills, and unspoken blame. Billy Jo worked long hours to keep everything afloat. She paid for food, rent, and utilities while trying to maintain order in a home that seemed to resist peace. Leilani, unable to hold steady work and still entangled with personal struggles, grew defensive and distant. Every small inconvenience, a misplaced toy, a pile of laundry, could ignite a shouting match that shook the house. On September 7th, police were called to the property after another confrontation erupted between mother and daughter. According to the report, what began as a dispute over chores spiraled into a fight about money, responsibility, and trust. The next day, exhausted and feeling betrayed, Billie Jo went to court and filed an eviction notice. She wanted her daughter and Daniel out, but leaving was easier said than done. Leilani had no stable income, no place to go, and 3 children depending on her in some way. The stress tightened around her like a vice. In early October, a judge ruled that she must start paying child support to her mother, $150 a month beginning November 1st. It was a small amount on paper, but to Leilani, it felt impossible. As Billie Jo left town for a work trip, she believed her daughter would be gone by the time she returned. She couldn't know that the pressure inside that house was about to reach a terrible breaking point, and that within days, Savannah would wake to the kind of news that leaves a community forever changed. The morning of October 5th, 2022, began quietly in the Buckhalter Road home. The sun had barely risen when Quinton's babysitter, Michelle, received an unexpected message from Daniel, Leilani's boyfriend. It read simply that she wouldn't need to come that day. Leilani wanted to keep the children at home. It was strange. For months, Michelle had cared for Quinton and his siblings every weekday, always from 6 a.m. to mid-afternoon. The sudden change felt off, but she brushed it aside. An hour later, another message arrived with the same instruction. This time, worry replaced curiosity. By 9 a.m., unable to ignore her instincts, Michelle decided to drive to the Simon house anyway. What she saw would linger with her forever. Confusion, chaos, and Leilani standing outside, cigarette in hand, pale and shaking. When Michelle asked if she could come in to help search for the little boy, Leilani refused. Minutes later, Michelle urged her to call the police. At 9:39 a.m., the 911 call went through. A missing child, a front door left open, and a mother claiming she had no idea where her son had gone. Officers arrived within minutes, spreading out through the surrounding fields and woods, shouting Quinton's name into the autumn air. Neighbors joined in, desperate and afraid. Billie Jo, still out of town, got the devastating call from the babysitter. Her grandson was missing. She drove back to Savannah overnight, her heart breaking with every mile. By noon, the search had grown massive. Local police, the FBI, and hundreds of volunteers combed through creeks, abandoned lots, and nearby neighborhoods. Drones scanned from above, while K-9 units traced scent trails that vanished as abruptly as they began. Yet, despite the chaos, there was no sign of Quinton. Then came a detail that unsettled investigators. According to his family, Quinton had never opened a door by himself before. He was too small, too young. If the door had truly been open that morning, someone else must have opened it. What began as a hopeful search was turning into something heavier, darker. A mystery that would soon test not only the limits of faith, but the definition of love itself. As the days passed with no trace of little Quinton, the tone of the investigation began to shift. What started as a desperate community search soon became a quiet, methodical unraveling of truth. Detectives spoke to neighbors, reviewed surveillance footage, and re-examined every detail of Leilani's timeline. Each time they asked her to explain what had happened that morning, her story changed, sometimes slightly, sometimes drastically. At first, she said she had been asleep and woke to find the door open. Later, she mentioned running errands early that morning. Then, when confronted with phone data showing inconsistencies, she adjusted her version again. Investigators discovered that her phone had pinged near a neighborhood known for petty crime at an hour that didn't match her statements. There was no record of the friend she claimed to visit. No text messages to support her account. Her interviews grew emotional, but not consistent. Officers described her tears as appearing and disappearing at convenient moments, surfacing when questions got close to the truth, fading when timelines didn't fit. Meanwhile, forensic teams searched the family's home. They found small but troubling signs: stains on bedding, a discarded toy, a sense that something was terribly wrong. Yet still, there was no physical evidence of where Quinton had gone. Then, on October 12th, after a week of exhaustive searching, Chatham County Police made a heartbreaking announcement. They no longer believed Quinton was alive. Leilani Simon was officially named the prime suspect in her own son's disappearance. The community's grief turned to anger. Outside the house, crowds gathered holding signs that read, "Justice for Quinton." Candles flickered on the sidewalk each night. News cameras stayed parked along the street, capturing every glance, every word. Through it all, Leilani remained inside, avoiding reporters, rarely showing emotion. But what shocked the public most came days later. As the FBI continued their work, Leilani and her mother, Billie Jo, were spotted at a beach bar laughing and drinking. Just miles away from the landfill, investigators were combing through. For many, it was an image they couldn't forget. A mother smiling while search teams dug through mountains of waste under the Georgia sun. Something inside that house had gone terribly wrong. The question now wasn't whether Quinton had been taken, but what exactly had happened within those walls, and why. By mid-October, investigators had one goal left: to find Quinton and bring the truth into the light. Their focus narrowed to a place no one wanted to imagine, a local landfill near Savannah. Surveillance footage from the night of October 5th showed a light-colored Dodge SUV leaving the Simon home around 1:20 a.m. and heading toward a nearby trailer park. Minutes later, the same vehicle was caught near a row of dumpsters. It wasn't definitive proof, but it was enough to start a search that would test the endurance of everyone involved. The FBI joined local police in an operation that stretched for weeks. Day after day, under the heat, in the smell and chaos of discarded life, officers combed through more than 1 million pounds of waste. Slowly, carefully, respectfully. Rain poured. The air was thick with silence and sorrow, but they refused to stop. On November 18, 2022, after nearly 6 weeks of digging, an officer named Sophia Zwierka noticed something small and pale among the debris. She froze. Her training told her what her heart already knew. They had found what they were looking for. It was a fragment, fragile and unmistakable. The search ended that day, and Savannah held its breath. Forensic confirmation came from the FBI lab in Quantico. The remains belonged to Quinton Simon. Within hours, police moved in. Leilani Simon was arrested at her home and charged with multiple counts, including false reporting and concealing the death of another. The words used by law enforcement were careful, professional, but the emotion behind them was unmistakable. They had found the truth, and it was devastating. When reporters asked about the discovery, the police chief paused before answering. "This case broke our hearts," he said softly. "We wanted to bring Quinton home. Now we can." The community mourned together that night. Candles glowed again on Buckhalter Road, this time not for hope, but for goodbye. And amid the flicker of light, a question lingered in every mind. How could love, family, and protection collapse into something this tragic? Nearly 2 years later, the case that had gripped Savannah returned to the courtroom. The trial of Leilani Simon began on October 9, 2024. Journalists filled every seat, and outside the courthouse, the same faces who had once searched the fields now gathered again. Older, quieter, but still waiting for justice. Inside, the prosecution laid out its story, piece by piece. They presented GPS data showing the late-night drive, surveillance footage of the Dodge SUV near the trailer park, and phone records that contradicted every version of Leilani's timeline. Detectives testified about the inconsistencies, the missing hours, and the discovery that had ended the search. It wasn't one piece of evidence that condemned her, they said. It was the pattern, the deception, and the silence. Witnesses stepped forward, some with trembling voices. The babysitter, Michelle, described the children she had cared for and how Quinton always smiled when he saw her. She spoke of a home where love and neglect coexisted in painful balance, and of the text messages that morning that made her uneasy. Her words filled the courtroom with a quiet ache. Then came the most emotional testimony of all. From Billie Jo, the grandmother who had tried to hold the family together. She wept as she spoke, admitting her failures, her guilt, and her belief that she should have seen the signs sooner. Her voice cracked as she said, "We can't bring him back, but he deserves peace. We all do." After weeks of testimony, the jury returned with its verdict. Guilty on all 19 counts. When asked if she wished to speak, Leilani declined. She stood still, eyes down, saying only that she wanted her son's remains to be given to her brother, the one person she still trusted. The judge sentenced her to life in prison with the possibility of parole after 30 years, plus 10 additional years. The courtroom remained silent, the weight of those words pressing on everyone present. Outside, a light rain began to fall, gentle, endless, as if the city itself was mourning the little boy who once called Savannah home. In the months that followed the verdict, Savannah began to heal, though the scar remained visible in every heart that had followed the case. At the end of Buckhalter Road, near the house where Quinton once played, neighbors built a small memorial, a patch of bright flowers, stuffed animals, and hand-painted rocks that read, "Monkey, you mattered." Every week, someone stopped by to replace a candle, straighten a toy, or simply whisper a prayer. For Billy Joe, the loss became both punishment and purpose. She began volunteering with local support groups for young parents, speaking quietly about the dangers of exhaustion, denial, and silence. "If you see something," she would say, "don't wait. Love should never hide behind fear." Her voice trembled each time, but it carried truth, the kind born from regret. Across Savannah, people who had once been strangers now recognized each other from those long days of searching. Some still remembered holding flashlights in the rain, calling Quinton's name into the darkness. Others kept newspaper clippings folded in their wallets as a reminder of why compassion must never come too late. The story of Quinton Simon became more than a headline. It became a quiet vow that no child's life should fade without remembrance, that justice means more than a sentence, and that even in tragedy, kindness can rise from the ruins. Today, his name still appears at community vigils and charity runs for missing children. His memory endures not in the way he was lost, but in the way people chose to care after he was gone. Rest in peace, little monkey. You were loved, you are remembered, and your story will continue to remind the world that every child deserves safety, hope, and a voice that will never again go unheard.